Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another webinar from CPA Academy. My name is Jasmine, and I'll be your moderator for today's event, QuickBooks Desktop Data Entry Efficiency Tips. Our presenter for today is, of course, Mr. Hector Garcia. We also want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Coral Tree, and we do have Allison here to take your questions. I'll be handing it over to Hector in just a moment, but before I do, I just want to do a quick check to make sure everything's working out there on your end in the audience. If you wouldn't mind, head over to the questions box on your GoToWebinar side panel, which should be on the right side of your interface, and type me a quick message to let me know that you can hear my voice and see the title slide on screen. Also, feel free to let me know what city you're listening in from. I love seeing that come in from all over the world. Now, while we're collecting those responses, please also note that this questions box will be like the chat for this webinar. This is where you can let me know if you have any technical trouble during the broadcast or if you have questions for Hector or Allison today. We'll do our best to get around to you all as quickly as we can. All right, let's see who we got checking in. I see Midland, Texas, Richmond, Virginia, Simpsonville, South Carolina, Fresno, Jefferson City. Awesome. You guys are coming in from all over. Thank you for confirming. Now that we know everything is working, let's go through a little housekeeping. This is a one CPE webinar. The way you earn that credit is fairly straightforward. You just need to do two things. Stay logged in for 50 minutes, that's 50 minutes, and answer the poll questions. We'll be announcing 4 polls today, and you'll have about 60 seconds to respond to each one. I do encourage you to answer as many as you can. You need to answer at least 3 for full credit, but we do encourage you to answer as many as you can and as quickly as possible. Plus, it'll be so interesting to see the results come in from across the audience. Finally, we are recording today's session, and the archive recording, as well as your CPE credit, will be in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. If you haven't already, please also download the handouts, which is located in the Handouts tab of your GoToWebinar side panel. All right, that's enough for me. We're all set. Please join me in welcoming our presenter. Hector, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hector Garcia, CPA and QuickBooks Pro Advisor. Today, I'm going to talk to you about QuickBooks Desktop data efficiency tips. And the reason why I want to do that, because I want to highlight all the great things, or remind you, for that matter, all the great things that QuickBooks Desktop has and why QuickBooks Desktop is still king in my world, at least from an efficiency, data entry, data manipulation perspective. There are many, many QuickBooks Online users. Many of you probably use QuickBooks Online and love it. And granted, QuickBooks Online is great. But if you're using QuickBooks Desktop, I would love for you to maximize its capabilities. If there's anything that I didn't cover or wasn't clear, my email is on the slides, so you can shoot me an email anytime you want to. I want to thank our sponsor, Coral Tree, for sponsoring today's webinar, and we're going to talk about QBox. I'm going to talk about QBox first, get that out of the way, and then we can jump right into QuickBooks Desktop. So what's QBox? QBox is, best way to describe it is, if you ever used Dropbox or FileShare or Google Drive, it is one repository of QuickBooks files that allows multiple users from distant locations, from remote locations, to access the same QuickBooks file. Now, the problem with using a file sharing app like Dropbox or ShareFile is that these are not designed to lock the files to disallow multiple users opening the same file at the same time and creating conflicted copies or duplicate copies. So what QBox does, which is unique to any other file sharing app, is that ability to lock the files so people can work at their own time, in their own turn, and avoid having to move files back and forth and have duplicate versions of those files. I'm going to show you a quick video, and the link to the video, it's in the slides, so you can see that again. But I'm going to show you a quick video that illustrates, and I'm just going to play it as a screenshot. So first thing you're going to see when you have QBox set up, especially if you're an accountant working with multiple clients, you're going to see the QBox Explorer, which is going to have a folder for each of your customers. In QBox, the way you pay for the QuickBooks subscription is per folder. It's not per client, it's per folder. So most people are going to have one client per folder. So then in that case, it would be per client. But if you have one particular client that has 2, 3, or 4 QuickBooks files, you will have one folder where all the files are in there. In other words, a folder is an area in which you can collaborate with your client. Now, if you are not collaborating with clients and you're collaborating with other users inside your accounting firm, then you could essentially have one folder with unlimited QuickBooks desktop files, but just keep in mind that whoever you give access to that folder, you give access to all the files. So it's a file sharing app focused for QuickBooks that allows to set up a locking mechanism. So I'm going to show you what a locking mechanism looks like. You double click on the file that you want to open, and then QuickBooks opens like normal. And then you're going to get, you log in, then you're going to get a little pop-up that says, hey, QBox detected you open the file that resides in the QBox folder. Do you want to lock it? So when you lock it, that means that someone else cannot open it. If you don't lock it, then you're viewing it, but you always run the risk of someone else opening it and doing updates to the file that you are looking at. So the idea is that you lock it to avoid anyone else from logging in and modifying it. Then you do your thing, you make all your adjustments in QuickBooks, finish working, and while you're connected, just kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. If someone else wants to open that file, they're going to see where it says synced by, they're going to see who is the user that's currently using that file, and whether or not it's locked. You're going to see the little lock icon. Once the person logs out, you're no longer going to see the lock, and you're going to see a little checkbox under sync. That means the file, it's available for use. So access to that video that kind of walks you step by step of that process, and it's on the slide, screenshots as well, it's in there. The price for QBox is $12 a month per folder, per sync folder, or $120 a year. So one of the big questions that people ask on QBox is, what's the difference between QBox and, let's say, hosting? Well, when you host it, you're going to pay per month per user, and typically it's going to be a lot more than $12 a month. Now, when you're hosting, the nice thing is you can work on real time, so you could have a multi-user license and have 2, 3 people working at the same time. Maybe the accountant is collaborating, but obviously you have that cost component. Nice thing about QBox is you don't need a multi-user license, because you can have the same file being opened by 2 different QuickBooks files. They don't need to be in multi-user license because they will never be in multi-user mode. Second question I get a lot is, what about multi-user instances? Can I use QBox with multi-user? So if you have a local area network with a multi-user setup, all those users can be working on multi-user whenever they want. When the accountant or the person logging in from QBox wants to connect, at that point, it needs to be in single user. So the pros on QBox is the locking mechanism and the price. You can't beat that against hosting type of environment. And obviously the con, the drawback is it needs to be in single user, one person at a time. I tend to work with a lot of my clients in that way. Now, how would you compare that with accountant's copy, for example? So this would be a great alternative to accountant's copy, because if your client sends you an accountant's copy and you're working on that copy, but the client releases that restriction, then you cannot send any changes back. This is the one ironclad way to make sure that while you're working on a client's QuickBooks files, they're not messing up, so to speak, things in the background, or they're not changing things on you. So you can work, finish, and release your work in QBox. Now, the other nice thing about QBox is it's a 30-day free trial, no credit card required. And if you're still not sure 100% how it works, you can schedule a one-on-one demo with a QBox expert right in the QBox website. So go ahead and give them a glance, check out QBox, and I guarantee you it's going to change the way you collaborate with your clients, especially QuickBooks Desktop clients. All right, so I'm going to launch the polling question number 1. So Jasmine, you want to launch polling question number 1? Thank you.
You got it. Poll number 104 is live on everyone's screen now. We'd like to know, have you ever heard of QBox prior to this webinar? Please choose your options from those on screen. You'll want to click the radio button that corresponds with your answer, and be sure to click the submit button to register your response. We'll leave this open for another 30 seconds or so. Go ahead and vote now for poll number 1 of 4.
Perfect. And I do want to remind you, if you go to the QBox website, you can schedule a one-on-one if you want to be walked through this process in a one-on-one scenario. I get it. If you're seeing this for the first time, it's a novel concept. If you used Dropbox before, probably the best way to understand it is a Dropbox that will not create conflicted copies. Because I remember when Dropbox came out, I said, wow, this is going to be great for my QuickBooks files. And it corrupted QuickBooks files. It created duplicate copies. It's a big no-no to use a Dropbox or a share file type of system for a QuickBooks file. Okay, so we have 95% of the votes.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and shut this poll down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the biggest proponent of our responses came in as no, I don't, but I now understand what it is. So you guys are in the right place. Back to you, Hector.
Perfect. So thank you for that. Let's jump right into our QuickBooks Desktop tips. So we talked about the QBox introduction. Okay, now we're going to talk about bank feeds and a vendor import trick. So I'm going to sprinkle in this session a couple of things that you know, a couple of things you may not know, and a combination of tools inside of QuickBooks Desktop that when you see them work together, you might kind of see the big picture about why QuickBooks Desktop is so great and why, you know, a lot of people still prefer it over online, specifically because of the ability to use these type of tools in combination. So let's jump right into QuickBooks Desktop. And I am in QuickBooks Desktop 2022, in this particular case. So if you're working with an older version, 2020 or older, your bank feeds screen is going to look different than mine, because this bank feed screen, the new updated advanced bank feeds, it's for 2021 and 2022. So hopefully you're working on a newer version that looks just like this. So in this particular screen, I have, I'm in my banking screen. Let's assume I just uploaded January of 2021 onto it for this credit card account. And the first thing you will notice is the transactions were downloaded, but there are no payees. And the reason why there are no payees is because none of these payees have ever been created before. So what you need to do when you're doing bank feeds is come in here and create each payee one at a time. So you have to come in here, create the payee, go to Quick Add, vendor, type it in, and hit OK. Not a big deal. Most of us are used to doing that. The problem is, in my opinion, especially when you do, let's say, a year's worth of transactions, it's going to take you forever to create those payees. So the first trick I want to show you is going to help you speed up the bank feeds process, because you're going to import those payees prior to entering those bank feed transactions. Now, this works best with credit card transactions where the payees are very clearly identified. With banks, it all depends on how banks organize the information. So the first thing that we're going to do is I want you to go into the bank, the same bank that you're using to connect to QuickBooks Online, and I want you to request a CSV file of the bank download. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a CSV file I downloaded from Chase. So that's kind of premise number one. You have to be able to go into the bank and download that CSV file. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to identify which is the column that has the payees. You can sit there and clean the payees if you want to. I recommend doing that afterwards, especially with credit cards. It's much easier to just take that entire payee list, copy and paste it into QuickBooks Desktop. So once you download a CSV file prior, you have that payee list. You're going to go back into QuickBooks Desktop. We're going to click on the list menu. Okay, right here, list. And then we're going to click on add, edit, multiple list entries. So that's probably one of my favorite tools inside QuickBooks Desktop, and that's available in Pro, Premier, Enterprise, Accountant, all the versions, which is really cool. Then under list, we're going to change that from customers to vendors, because that's what we want to do. We want to import those vendors. We're going to click on vendors. Where it says view, we're going to change that from active vendors to unsaved vendors. So basically, these are the ones that we haven't saved yet. that we're in the process of creating new ones and saving, probably the best option to pick, unsave vendors. So you're just gonna have a blank screen, which is fine. So then I go back into my my spreadsheet that I downloaded, CSV file I downloaded from the bank directly, and then I'm going to copy that entire column that has all the vendor lists. Again, you have to have been able to go to the bank and download that CSV file, secondary to the direct connection to the bank or the .qbo web connect file that you imported into QuickBooks. Then we're going to go back into QuickBooks. Again, we were in list, add, edit multiple list entries. That's how we got into that screen. List, add, edit multiple screen entries. We switched it to vendor, went to unsave vendors. Then we're going to put the cursor right there on the first box where it says vendor name, just a blank box. We're going to right click on that, and then we're going to click on paste. Okay, so that's going to paste all the things that we copied from the previous CSV file spreadsheet that we have. Okay, don't worry too much about duplicates. Don't worry about messy vendor lists. We're going to talk about how to clean that up afterwards. Right now, we're just going to just dump all the vendors in there. Now, I do want to add a note. You can clean this up in Excel prior if you want to, especially if you're doing a whole year's worth. It might be worth it for you to clean them up, delete extra characters, all that stuff in Excel. Just sort them in Excel and clean them up prior. Then I'm going to click on Save Changes, and that's going to save all the vendors in there. It'll give me errors for the duplicates. That's okay. At this point, you don't have to do anything else. Just once it's saved, whatever you need to save, whatever's left in red, just press Escape on the keyboard or hit Close, and you get out of that screen, and then click on No. So I'm going to get out of my banking screen, and I'm going to go back to it one more time. I'm going to go to Banking. I'm going to go to Banking, Bank Feeds, and get into my bank feeds again. Bank Feeds Center. That's where I was before. Center was for Bank Feed Center, and go back. There, and I'm going to go back there. And now we're going to see that the sections downloaded. By the payee recognize. They will all recognize. You will notice that some of them were not recognized, and for the ones that were not recognized, I can click on Select All. Even though the payees were recognized, the accounts were not necessarily recognized. So all these that I don't have the accounts pre-filled for me, again, which could be wrong. We're recognizing that off the bat. I'm going to go to Batch Actions, and then I'm going to click on Modify. So I'm going to go to Batch Actions. I'm going to click on Modify. And then once I do that, and actually I should do all money in and all money out in one shot. So when I click on Select All, I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck the payments coming in, right? Because when you modify, it only needs to be for either all deposits or all payments or all credit card charges and all payments or all checks, all deposits. Those two things have to be done separately. So again, we're going to go to Batch Action after I selected them all, and then I'm going to click on that little Modify button that's there. So Batch Actions, Modify, and then under Account, notice I'm not going to change Payee. So the Payee is going to stay the way it is. Okay, I'm not going to touch the Payee. That Payee is already entered in there. All the other information, it's already entered in there. The only thing is I'm going to do Account. So if I have something, if I haven't asked my accountant account, or I'm going to create one called To Reclass. So I'm just going to create a new account called To Reclass. I'll make it an other expense called To Reclass. And what I'm doing at this point is I am just going to make everything to reclass, and then I'll deal with the classification later, which is kind of the point that I want to make here. So we're batching the vendors in there. They're being recognized automatically. We're picking one account to just dump them in there. I don't even want to be thinking about it. I'm just gonna push in the data forward. Move forward. So at this point, I can click on add and confirm and accept all those. Change them in Excel before. This is why I didn't. We have here, you know, these two here, same thing. Fix that stuff later on, and then I'll save and add to register. Already categories being created for it. More real estate. If you look at Office Depot, that went to Office. If you don't like the way any of these, let's say these are all personal, and I didn't like the way these modify those, so I can go to not a match. So this screen gets refreshed, okay, and it should send them. I don't know where to put them, but it should. I'll finish doing these here. And again, if I want prior, if you wanted to, and now the transactions have been added into the register. So now they're in. So I'm going to pull up a profit and loss statement really quick. I'm going to go to reports, company financial profit and loss standard. And I do want to add that I had a blank file. So the only transactions you're going to see are the ones that I just categorized. So I'm going to do all dates, and notice that some stuff went into the categories that QuickBooks automatically thought they were the right ones, and we didn't modify at that point. We just accepted them as is, okay? And then a whole bunch of stuff went into to reclass. So that's kind of the first step. Now, you could have intervened and categorized them correctly. You didn't have to push them into to reclass, but what I'm doing is I'm setting it up for the next thing I want to show you. So the next thing I want to show you is what happens when you import all those vendors and essentially duplicate vendors were created. So first I do the this step, which is bringing the transactions in there. Second step is I want to clean up my vendor list. Now, if you know how to merge vendors, if you've done that before, you know that the best way to do it is to right click on one vendor, click on edit, and then copy the name of the one that you want to keep, and then go to the second duplicate one. So in this case, it would be this one called Spaceport Ticketing. Let's say that's my duplicate that I want to merge into Spaceport Restaurant. Right click on that, click on edit vendor, and then I'll replace the name and give it the exact same name as the other one. Click on OK, and then it'll ask me to merge. Now I do the merging prior to doing the bank categorization because I want the vendors to be categorized automatically. Nice thing about this is that when those transactions came in, they originally came into two different vendors. Now they're merged and they're all going to the consolidated vendor, which is exactly what we wanted. Now this takes a long time to do one by one. So what you want to do is you want to leverage the merge vendors tool. This was introduced in QuickBooks Desktop Accountant and Enterprise 2020. So you got 2020, 21, 22 or something newer that you're going to see that feature in there. That's going to be under the accountant menu. So we're going to click on accountant. And then we're going to go into client data review, and we're going to find merge vendors in there. So accountant, client data review, and then right here at the bottom, it's under merge vendors. If you're working with enterprise and not the accountant edition, it should be under company accountant tools or something like that. So we're going to go into that merge vendors tool, and we're going to show you the same thing I did but instead of doing copy and pasting, we're going to do this in a much quicker way. So I'm going to sort the vendors by name. I'm going to go find duplicate vendors or vendors that are clogging up my vendor list. So let's say we have, let's find some duplicates here. So here's one. We have Intuit, QuickBooks Online, Intuit Payroll, Intuit QuickBooks, Intuit Payroll. I'm going to call these all Intuit QuickBooks. So I pick the one that I want to keep. So let's say this is the one that I want to keep, the first one. I select all 4 of them, up to 4 at a time. Then I'm going to click on Next. Then I'm going to pick the first one, which is the one I wanted to keep, or keep the one, whichever one is the one that you want to keep as the one that becomes a permanent record. And then you can either back up and merge, so back up the file prior to a merge, or if you know what you're doing, you can go straight into a merge. Click on Merge, then click on Yes, and then within seconds, now all 4 of those vendors and every single transaction in that vendor. So I'm going to go into it here. So every transaction in that vendor now got consolidated into a single vendor or payee. So that's going to be, again, you don't have to worry so much about creating the add, edit tool and create a whole bunch of duplicate vendors. You can go back later on and clean them up. That's why I prefer to do that process. So let's do one more merging of the vendors. So client data review, merge vendors. Okay, so right there, merge vendors under client data review. Okay, and so accountant, client data review, merge vendors. We pick the vendors that we want to merge together. So 2 vendors that are essentially the same thing that was duplicated because I pushed it with the import. So let's say this public says I want to make them all one. So I select all 3 of them. Okay, again, so I'm just picking the vendors that are duplicated. Okay, you can also do a search up here if they don't necessarily have the same starting letter. Then I'm going to go into the next button on the bottom right of the screen. Go to next, and then you have the option to back up and merge or merge. I know what I'm doing, so I go straight into merge. But if you're doing this for the first time, you're welcome to do a backup first. Now I pick the one vendor that I want to keep, the one vendor that's going to be the one that everything gets merged into. Then I click on merge, wait a couple of seconds. After I hit yes, and now all my vendors are now one vendor. So if I go back into my vendor list and I'm going to search here for Publix, which is a vendor I just merged. Okay, then I have all my transactions for Publix all in one vendor. So the reason why this is so important is, number one, you obviously don't want a messy vendor list, but 2, when you run your reports under company financial expenses by vendor summary, which in my opinion is probably one of the most powerful analytical reports in the world of QuickBooks. So reports, company financial expenses by vendor summary, because that gives you a really nice bird's eye view of all the money that you're spending or where all the money is going. And if you got duplicate vendors in there, starts losing its power, because then you start seeing numbers sort of across multiple vendors. You don't get to see, sort of sort by the biggest number in the top and that sort of thing. So again, you don't want to have some pass duplicated like you see here, or you don't want to have Starbucks duplicated like you see here. The report loses its power when you see duplicate vendors. So really important. So I'm teaching you how to enter a bunch of vendors in one shot and then how to merge them. And now you kind of see both sides of the coin. Second piece here is when we loaded those transactions in without having to choose the vendors or the payees. I mean, we chose the vendor payees, but we didn't pick the category, is we dumped everything in to reclass. Now remember that because the vendors are loaded, next time you go next month, February, March, April, whatever, some of these vendors will start being recognized automatically, or at least they will be on your vendor list, and you don't have to spend extra time creating one vendor at a time. So it's possible you do this once for a whole year worth of cleanup or data entry, or it's possible that you do this every month, really depending on how many new vendors you will be creating at the same time. Okay. Now, one quick question I have here that I think is worth answering is, what happens if there's transactions before a closing date? So this will allow you to merge vendors even if there's a closing date password and it will modify retroactively transactions prior to the closing date. So when you're merging forever for every date of every transaction where that vendor's ever been used. It won't separate the pre-closing date vendors as separate vendors and the post-closing date as different vendors. That's why it will ask you to back up prior, because it knows that some people will not keep that in mind, and the merging could be catastrophic. Okay. All right. So let's talk about now the reclassification of all those transactions I dumped into reclass. And again, I recommend doing this after you merge the vendors. You will see why. And so I'm going to go into accountant, then I'm going to go to client data review and reclassify transactions. So again, it's under client data review and it's called reclassify transactions. So accountant, client data review, reclassify transactions. That's what we're going to go into. Okay. So once we go into that screen, you're going to see a date range. So obviously in this, you have to make sure the date range is accurate. So it covers the period you want to reclass. And then we already created an account here called to reclass. So you see it right there very clearly. It says to reclass, and there's $13,000 in there. I'm making another expense, so it's easier to find. Usually it's going to be all the way in the bottom. Next thing we do to reclass is generally, we're going to just sort it by name. So we're going to go into the sorting, click on name, sort it by name. That allows me to select a bunch of transactions at the same time. So I can go in there and I just select all my Apple transactions at the same time, putting checkboxes on them. Unfortunately, on this screen, shift click doesn't work. One of my big pet peeves of the screen, that you can click one, hold the shift key and select a whole bunch. Don't know why, but shift click doesn't work. You still have to click one at a time. So you click a whole bunch of them at the same time. Then you're going to come down here in the bottom where it says account to, and this is where we do our mass reclassification. We go to account to, and then let's say this is going to be office supplies, and simply I hit the little checkbox, pick the new account that I want all these things to be reclassified to, and in one fell swoop, we click on reclassify in the bottom of the screen. You're going to see this is really cool here. Total selected. It lets you know how much is being reclassified prior from you doing that push. We click on reclassify. All the transactions get reclassified in one shot. Now, if your vendors are properly merged, like for example, in this case, notice that I have GoDaddy and GoDaddy Europe. I should have merged those, because one of the really cool things about this screen is to filter them by vendor. So I can come in here and put that GoDaddy vendor, right? And then I can select them all in one shot. So I can click on select all. So once I filter by vendor, again, I clicked on name first, and then I selected the vendor I wanted to reclassify to. And then I clicked on select all. So that saved me doing all those little checkboxes. And down here in the bottom, let's say I want to reclassify this to advertising or whatever category happens to be the correct one. Then I click on reclassify. The problem with not having those vendors merged prior, and I'll go ahead and delete that account that's up here in the top, is that I should have a spillover GoDaddy Europe that if I had merged them prior, it would have been part of that filter, and it really would have speed up that process. Let's do this Intuit QuickBooks one. So we got Intuit QuickBooks, which have been properly merged. There's a whole bunch of transactions in there. I click on select all, and then I put this into whatever it is. Let's say software cost. I'm going to create a new account called software cost. Make up an account number here. And again, I'm just creating a new account on the fly. You can do that as well in the reclass screen, and then click on save and close. Then I click on reclassify. All those transactions are being reclassed. I find this sometimes to be faster than the bank feed screen. Sometimes I find bank feeds categorization to be faster. It's up to you. You probably want to try both and see which are the ones that allow you to do that. Okay. All right. Perfect. So that takes care of, let's call it the first half of the webinar that focuses on the bank feeds, the vendor import, batch modify, and merge vendors. We're going to go ahead and move on to manual data entry, keyboard, and keyboard shortcuts. But first, let's run polling question number 2.
All right, you got it. Poll number 2 is live on everyone's screen right now. This question is asking, what is your preferred way of collaborating with clients using QuickBooks Desktop? We'll leave this open for about another 45 seconds.
Meanwhile, the polling question is up. Make sure you answer your polling question so you can get your CPE certificate. I am going to discuss a couple of the questions are here. So can you merge more than 5 vendors at the same time, doing more than 4 vendors with the merge tool? The answer is no. You can do a maximum of 4 at a time, but it is pretty quick. So you just do 4, do 4, do 4 if you happen to have a lot of gas stations or a lot of McDonald's or a lot of sort of the same type of restaurant that keeps repeating itself. Second question is, when I log in the next month and I download my transactions, will it recognize some of the vendors? The answer is yes, it'll recognize some of them. Remember, as you're merging, QuickBooks is not seeing this one-to-one relationship on the vendor names the way it did when I did a clean import. So I'll recognize some, and the rest you're going to have to manually recognize them and create those rules as you go, little by little. As you create more and more rules, then you start teaching the bank feed system to recognize these vendors. Remember, this tip is extremely great for people getting started in banking or doing a whole bunch of months of banking at the same time. It just sets the initial pace of the data entry process. Where can I do all this in QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Premier? So the answer is QuickBooks Pro and QuickBooks Premier does not have the batch reclassify tool, but it does have the add edit tool. So you can use the add edit tool to bring in the vendors, and you can do all the bank feeds tricks, but you will not be able in Pro and Premier to mesh the vendors and reclassify afterwards. That's really important. Okay, so the new bank feeds tool, the one you're seeing on the screen that has a facelift from all bank feeds, that's for 2021 and 2022. So 2020 and older is still the old bank feeds system. Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on to keyboard shortcuts, data entry shortcuts. So this is going to be, in some cases, happens to be my favorite way of teaching how to do manual data entry, because no matter what, no matter how much we try to bring our transactions from the bank, import them from Excel, there's going to be situations where it just isn't enough to warrant an entire setup for batch entry or for data import, and entering by hand is going to be the best choice. So what I want to show you is the best, most optimal way to enter transactions by hand. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my chart of accounts, and I'm going to double click on any of the bank accounts or credit card accounts that I want to use for manual data entry. So let's just create a new, I'm going to create a new credit card account. I'm going to do the same one just so I can show you by actually doing manual data entry. So we're going to call it Chase 3715, save and close, and then hit no. And then I'm going to double click on that so I get into my check register. Now I'm also going to make this a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to go in there and put my spreadsheet on the right-hand side and my QuickBooks on the left-hand side. Generally, in your world, you probably will have 2 monitors, so it won't look like this. It would be across different monitors, but I'm trying to emulate this on the webinar, on the video recording, as good as possible, so you can follow along as if you had 2 monitors, right? So I'm going to enter the transactions by hand. So generally, one of the things I do want to do is I want to always sort whichever way I'm doing the transactions. I want to sort them by date, because I do want to try to go in sequential order. It's typically the best way to do it. So I'm going to go in sequential order in this particular case, and I'm going to enter all these transactions. So right here on the right-hand side, it's my spreadsheet, my bank statement, my printout, my second screen, wherever I have my transactions. And on my left side, it's just my regular good old QuickBooks that I'll be using to do manual data entry. I'm also going to move the left navigation bar to the top so we can focus our attention all the way to the left as we enter the date. Second tip I'm going to give you is I usually like doing data entry as a one-liner. So you're going to see all the way in the bottom, you're going to see one line. Okay, I like doing one line. There's one really fast way to get to one line, which is Alt 1. So you press Alt-1 on the keyboard. Now, why Alt-1, or how do I remember Alt-1? Well, the 1 has a highlight under it. Anytime you see anything in QuickBooks or in any Windows application that has something highlighted under it, that means that you can activate that with your keyboard shortcut using Alt. So Alt-1 on my keyboard will switch from regular mode to one-liner mode. I think for data entry purposes, one line is the best. Okay, so let's now enter some of the transactions. We'll start with 12, 27, 2020. So the first thing to do is I'm going to type 122720. I want you to pay attention to that tip. I am not doing 12/27/20, or I'm not putting 2020. I'm doing 6 digits and 6 digits only. And the reason for that is because I want to do it faster. And that's what I'm teaching you. Okay. So we're going to do 6 digits, no slashes. Then we do tab, reference number, leave blank, tab, payee. Here's where we're going to type our payee name. So in this case, I happen to have my vendor name here in my list. So I can just start typing, hit down on the keyboard, down arrow, that will select the payee that I want. Again, remember, I imported these prior, right? When I hit tab, then I pick my category, let's say it's meals and entertainment. Then I hit tab, then I go 78.56. Then I go tab, 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 and that saves the transaction. So you kind of want to get used to just the cadence of your tabs. So next transaction, QuickBooks will automatically, depending on your preference, will automatically show the next transaction as the last transaction that you created. I do want to show you that preference because not everybody has that preference set up. We're going to go to the edit menu first, and then we're going to go into preferences. So edit menu, preferences, and there's a very specific preference where you tell QuickBooks Desktop how you want it to match, how you want it to manage date entering. So right now, the default date for new transactions is the last date used. You always want to do this when you're doing batch manual data entry because the probabilities that you'll be creating transactions that are sort of back to back next to each other, okay? Next to each other, you want to do that, right? In the regular world, when you're not doing back to back data entry, best thing to do is use default. You select the option to default to today's date because most users forget about dates and most transactions entered in real time are today's transactions. So it's kind of a dichotomy here. It's a chicken and egg situation. Which one should I use? So when you are going into doing batch data entry like the way I'm doing now, you come back and you switch it to last enter date. When you're done, you go back into your preferences and switch it to today's date. That would be my best practice to use. Perfect. Next transaction has the same date. Tab, tab, type Chick-fil-A. There it is. One vendor because I cleaned it up prior, hopefully. Tab, then we go into meals and entertainment, whatever category happens to be. Tab, 31.85. Tab, 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 3 times. That saves the transaction. I'm gonna skip over to this one here called Sweet Blends because I want to show you how to change the date for this, for a date change. So most of you will go, okay, Hector, we understood what you told me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press 122820 and hit tab, and that's going to skip to the 28th. That is a good idea. I actually don't have any qualms with that. The thing is that generally, when you are just going to go up 1 date or 2 dates, what you want to do is you want to let the date automatically come in and then just press plus on your keyboard. So when you're on a date, when you hit plus on your keyboard, and I'm going to hit plus a whole bunch of times. And again, I just have the cursor right there on my date. So the cursor is just sitting there. I hit plus on my keyboard and it will go up 1 date. I hit minus on my keyboard and it will go down 1 date. So as you're doing data entry, you're going to find yourself just plussing 1, plussing 2 times, many times. So the next one here is Sweet Blends. And the default category for this, let's say, is owner's equity or shareholder distribution, or I don't know what the equity account is called in this QuickBooks file. Let's do shareholder distribution. Okay, so I'll just create the equity account really quickly. Again, you can create those accounts on the fly, and then enter the transaction 11.02, tap, 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 enter. Last thing I want to show you on this screen is the process of what's called default accounts. So this is different than bank feeds where you create rules, but you can create default expense categories. So for example, I'm going to go into my vendor list. So I'm going to go into Vendor Center, and then I'm going to search for Target, and I can double click on Target, and I can go into where it says account settings, and in here I can put office supplies and hit OK. And then let me go to the other Target, which should have been merged. By the way, merging those vendors would have saved me doing this twice. So I set up Target as a default category. I'm going to go to Publix, okay, search Publix, which is a supermarket, and I'm going to edit that, and I'm going to go into account settings. Again, that's in the vendor edit menu, account settings, and then we're going to pick the default category. Let's say that one is shareholder distribution, and then we hit OK. So if you set up those accounts prior, then when I come in here and I create, let's say, this Target transaction, okay, QuickBooks will automatically put in the default category, which is a really awesome, beautiful thing. It does take a little bit longer because I have to go into my vendor list and add those default categories. And unfortunately, there's no way to like import this, set them up in Excel and import them. Otherwise, I would have shown you how to do that for sure. But that's going to just speed up that process of 69 time 0.80, tap, tap, tap. Let's do the next one, which is a Publix. I hit plus on the keyboard to go up one date, tap, tap, hit Publix, tab, automatically goes to shareholder distribution. It's a beautiful thing. Hit tab, and then do 221.88, tap, tap, tap. So that's the whole set of tools that is in here. Now, let's say you wanted to quickly add a note to a transaction. Let's say that Barnes & Noble's transaction. So I'm going to go to Barnes & Noble's, and then I'm going to put here office supplies, but I want to put somewhere in the memo that this was a particular book, right? Or whatever it happens to be, or a gift for a client or a book for an employee. I want to put that somewhere. When I'm in a one-line mode, I don't get the memo. So because I like one-line mode for data entry, it feels so much faster. I'm going to remember to do Alt-1 to open that up, hit tab a couple of times to get to the memo. I hit tab way too many times. So we're going to hit tab a couple of times to get to the memo. We're going to put here a book for John, whatever it happens to be. And then I can Alt tab to go backwards or tab to go forward and put whatever dollar value we're going to put in there, which is $6.96. Tab, 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 enter to save it. Again, Alt-1 goes back to one-line mode. Alt-1 opens it up, which gives you access to that memo. So if I want to quickly edit the target one to put that I bought, I don't know, some ink, I go up arrow with my keys, hit tab, 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 sit on the dollar amount, tab, then go to Alt-1, then I go to tab, memo, and then I put ink for printer. And then if I need to go back, I go shift tab. If I need to go forward, just tap a couple of times until it saves and press enter. So that's what I want to show you, because you will, no matter what, no matter how much you try to automate everything and import everything, you will at some point do extensive amounts of manual data entry. Let's take a break to do polling question number 3. So polling question number 3.
All right, the third poll is live on everybody's screen now. Why do you prefer QuickBooks Desktop over QuickBooks Online? Please select one of the 5 options on screen, and as always, be sure to click that submit button. Leave this one open for another 30 seconds.
So after this polling question finishes, I'm going to quickly go over the batch enter transactions tool, which is different than the check register tool. And people always ask me, Hector, why are you teaching people how to use the check register when you have the batch enter tool? And as much as I love the batch enter tool doesn't show you existing transactions. So if you go straight to the batch enter tool, you always run the risk that if there's existing transactions there and you don't want to duplicate them, you don't get that visual. So what the check register allows me to do, again, not as nice as a batch entering with a copy and pasting, allows me to see what's there now and kind of follow along. I will show you the batch enter tool so you can see one more way to enter data in there, but it would be your choice of what you can do.
All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and shut down this third poll in 3, 2, and 1. One more poll to come. Back to you, Hector.
Perfect. I do want to share the results on this one. So 42% of you like QuickBooks Desktop because it has the features that you need. 20% of you is because of speed. You feel that it's faster. And 14 of you never use QBO. God bless you. Okay. All right. So let's go back into QuickBooks Desktop. One more thing about the check register I think is worth mentioning, and people ask me all the time, is how do I enter a class in here? So unfortunately, there's no way to enter class in here unless you do what's called a split. And if you can see here in the bottom, it says splits, and there is an S highlighted. So that means that you hit Alt S, so the Alt S on the keyboard, and then I have opened up for a customer job or for a class. So if I do want to enter a class that wasn't there on the first line, the solution was to do the Alt S, okay? And then hit yes. So I'm just gonna double click on the transaction here so you can see what that looks like with the class entered. And there is the class right there. So if you want to add customer job, class, or billable or line item memos, you're gonna do Alt S and open that up, and you'll be able to do that as much as you want. Again, I do like this screen for manual data entry and for avoiding potential duplicates. However, we have batch enter, probably the best thing that's ever come out of the QuickBooks developers is this tool. This tool, it's just amazing, okay? So I'm gonna go into accountant. I'm gonna go into batch enter transactions. It's right there, it's the third option there under accountant. So we're gonna go to accountant, go to batch enter transactions. If you're in QuickBooks Enterprise, that's gonna be under company. So batch enter transactions, and this only works when you have the data in Excel prior. So in this particular case, I'm gonna go into credit cards and credit card charges because I happen to have that spreadsheet. I'm gonna open this up here, okay? And we're gonna do the same thing we did with the check register, but the difference is that we are going to copy and paste the transactions in there. Now, a couple of things that becomes a little bit confusing is the whole usage of positives and negatives. So in this screen, all the natural transactions need to be a positive number. So my spreadsheet, I'm gonna go into my spreadsheet here. My spreadsheet by default is showing charges as negatives and deposits as positives, but that's not the natural way. So the natural way would be charges as positives and credits or payments to the credit cards as negatives. So I have to convert that first. Let me zoom this in so you can see that. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm going to do equals, select the cell, and then multiply it times -1, or I can do the negative version of the value. Press enter and zoom back out to normal. And then I'm just going to click and drag that all the way down here. Okay, and then I can copy this and paste it as values right on top of the existing stuff, delete the other stuff, and now I have them the way I want them. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take date, payee, and amount, and I'm going to arrange my batch enter to look exactly like that. So let's go back into the batch enter, and then I'm going to make sure that this is date. Again, we're making sure that this matches. So I need to move amount to be right after payee, right? So I'm going to move amount, go to move up. Okay, so we're going to click move up here to change order for it. Move up, and now we have date, payee, and amount. It's a beautiful thing. Click OK. Then I can take all this information and we can copy and paste it from here into batch enter. So right click and paste, batch enter. Now, because my vendors were already imported, and you would use the same importing tool that I told you earlier, import the vendors first. That way you don't get these little reds. These little reds is when the vendors are missing. All you have to do is click on it, hit tab, quick add, and OK. And then go down to the one that's duplicated. So there's another red here. Click on it, hit tab, enter, enter. Go to the next one. If there's any other reds, click on it. Click on it, hit tab, enter, enter. Now, if you know that these vendors are supposed to be something else, not that I want to create a new vendor, then don't do that. Then go to that red vendor that's there, hit cancel. Don't try to replicate it, and then type in there the one that you want to fix it to. So that's just a little nuance there that you need to possibly may need to choose the right vendor. Otherwise, if you create a vendor, you have to go back and merge again. That's why I showed you that. So once you did the copy and paste into batch enter, the next big decision you have to make is, well, do I go in there and start categorizing these? You can. I can go and categorize each one, right? So I go one by one, and I can start categorizing. The problem with batch enter is it won't automatically pre-fill the expense category based on a previous transaction. It won't do that, and it won't do it based on the vendor default. So this would be a manual process for sure, to have to select each one by one. Not too difficult. Just hit tab and start, selecting what you want. Hit tab, start selecting what you want. Notice, look, I'm doing this really fast. I'm not even using my mouse. I'm just using tab, 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 or shift tab to recognize them all. That's one way of doing it. I'm actually going to click save and just save those, the ones that had categories. And the ones that don't have categories, guess what? I can use the same technique I used before. Go to reclass, right click on that, click on copy down. Yes, I love that. Copy down is one of my favorite things in the QuickBooks world, only available in some screens. So we go to copy down, click on save and close, click on yes. Everything is saved in one fell swoop. And then I go back into my reclassify screen. And let's change this back to the right vendor name. Then I can go to my reclassify screen and reclassify the ones that I set up to reclass. Again, the difference is that when I go back into my check register, right? When I was in the check register, I could have potentially seen if there was a duplicate and prevent that from being entered. If I use batch enter, I don't get visibility over what's there now. And as you can tell, there's a couple of duplicates right there at the beginning because I entered those by hand first and then did the batch enter. So in order to avoid that, the check register works. So if you're going to use batch enter, just don't use the check register at all because it will create some confusion. Okay.
Hey,
so,
Hector.
Yes.
I was wondering if we could go ahead and launch that fourth poll.
Okay.
All right, I'll go ahead and put that up. We'd like to know, what is your favorite QuickBooks desktop feature? Please go ahead and choose one of the 5 options on screen, and you guys know what to do. Click that submit button.
And Jasmine beat me to it. I was about to say that. Okay, perfect. So, so I hope that clarifies the question over should I use check register or should I use batch enter? That should be very, very clear for you. Okay. Now, one thing I recommend, just a little quick tip here. When you do a batch enter, most people batch enter based on date, the way I did it. I prefer that you resort by payee in your Excel and then batch enter with the payee as the sorting mechanism. That way, when you have a whole bunch of transactions, they're essentially the same vendor, you can change them much quicker because they're all under each other. That way, you're not sort of switching back and forth.
All right, with that, I'll go ahead and shut down this fourth poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And awesome. Hector, do you have any final remarks before we go ahead and shut down the webinar?
I got a minute left. Okay, so I want to make sure that you're hyper aware that in the slides I put a YouTube video link to batch enter transactions. It's about 20-minute long video because you do want to get all those nuances. Obviously, in a webinar, it's difficult to get into high level of detail. And I do have a couple of slides in which I kind of highlight why people like QuickBooks Desktop over QuickBooks Online. I will give you what I think is sort of the difference. In QuickBooks Desktop, you got the Add Edit tool allows you to import vendors. We talked about that. You got IIF import, which we didn't chat about, but it can save you a lot of time if you know how to use that correctly. You got the copy and paste batch entering. You got the merge vendor, which I didn't put in the slides, and batch delete, which we didn't cover. Where QuickBooks Online wins, in my opinion, is the entire bank feed system is just better. Some banks allow you to download bank statements inside QuickBooks Online. It's got easy third-party integration. There's an awesome uncategorized transaction accountant client collaboration tool and tags, which QuickBooks Desktop doesn't have. If you want to learn more about the differences between QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, one of the slides has my big, huge matrix. It's got like 200 and something lines worth of transactions where I compare feature by feature across all versions. Check out the video resources, additional videos that I've created. Thank you very much to QBox. And there's my email. I love QuickBooks Desktop. We'll continue to do so. Hopefully I convince you that QuickBooks Desktop is still king.
Awesome. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Hector, for all these insights and all your expertise. Thanks to our attendees for their questions. If we didn't get to your questions, please note that they are shared with Hector in a full report. With that, we've come to the conclusion of today's webinar. We'll go ahead and start processing your credit later today. You'll get a copy of this webinar, handouts, and your credit will be in your account. That'll be in about 24 hours. Please take a look at your email inbox. We've sent you an evaluation link. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the presentation today. Please check the schedule on our website for additional information. And we hope to see you all very soon on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.